tonight. Suzanne?
Yes, I just ditto. I have nothing to add. Welcome to everyone. We are excited to hear from the folks in Asheville who have been doing this work and carrying water for these issues for a very long time. So it's going to be a pleasure.
So let's go ahead and get started. And what I thought we could do, and I'm going to have Dina and Suzanne, based on their knowledge and the years of visiting and working with the Asheville Racial Equity Collective. That's who we're here with tonight. And I really want to open up the door of conversation by allowing each of you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about who you are, how you're connected to the Asheville Racial Equity Collective. And it just makes sense, Marta, since I worked through you to organize this, to begin with you.
Okay, that's how we roll. Hey everyone, my name is Marta Alcala Williams, and I work for Asheville City Schools. I am the Director of Equity, and I went through REI in 2015, the fall of 2015. And of course, it transformed my life. And we won't talk about the hard moments that Dina called me in and out on till later. I think at first we just kind of start soft and easy. And Denier was a part of that same training, and many of you that are on this call. And after that, we're like, we have to keep bringing this. There's no way that we're not going to share this. And so I can proudly say that this weekend, tomorrow and Saturday, will be our 22nd REI in Asheville since 2015. And last month was our first virtual one. And tomorrow and Saturday will be our second virtual one. And it was still as powerful and as amazing. And yeah, we've learned a lot. We've had lots of difficult moments with even the folks right here on this panel with me on how this all works out and how we can really push on each other. And here we are. And do I get to pass it on to whomever I want, Monica, or you do that?
Sure, why not? That's a great way to do it.
All right, come on, Denier.
I knew you were going to do that.
Of course.
I am Denier Eicher. Martha and I went through, I think, the same first REI in Asheville and experienced it. I suspect we experienced it differently from everything that I've heard you say. I barely even knew who you were at the time. And I happen to serve as the equity director at Rainbow Community School, a private school in Asheville. And I'm not even sure what else to say about that. We have been, I think from the start, I do know that very first REI session in Asheville, Dina said something that another organizer in the area and I found really interesting, and talked to Martha about it. And we said, okay, then we just have to caucus. Dina said, our job is not to let you process and reflect here. You all need to caucus afterwards. And that I think is what started the relationship and this ongoing effort to continuously bring REI to our community, and to continuously after that just move the conversation along with caucusing after that. And I think that's how we are all gathered here today. Oh, I'm supposed to call. I'm going to call Ashley.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Ashley Cooper. So I came to this group a little bit later. I wasn't there at that first one. And the encouragement, because I do a lot of community organizing. I'm one of those people that advocacy for the city, advocacy for the city schools. I serve on boards. I'm just kind of one of those. I work for myself. I'm an independent consultant, and I do facilitation and facilitation training and program design. And then when invited by people of color, I join them to do anti-racism training or white caucusing. And Marta was like, you have to come. You have to hear, like, not only do you need this, and you have to understand this shared analysis that we're finally going to have as a city, that listen to the people that are coming through this. And as a city, we're starting to have a shared language, and it's essential that you understand this shared language that they were all developing. So I came and had my own awe and had my own Martha calling me in on the phone call afterwards. And, and that was like a strengthening of our relationship, actually, knowing like, okay, like you're gonna communicate to me if something needs to be communicated to me. And then I have joined the caucus organizing. So we call our caucusing Keep It Moving Coalition. And I'm one of the organizers and facilitators for the White Caucus. That's a little taste. I will pass it to Steve.
Thanks, Ashley. So I'm Steve Cooperman, and I don't remember, I probably first did REI in 2000 and you said 2015 was the year you all did it? So probably the next year, 2016. Professionally, my paid work is I'm an organization development consultant, and I bring a racial equity lens into that work. But really, it was getting involved with the REI and the caucusing that was the start of my racial equity journey, and so really only for the past 5 years. And I'm involved as one of the caucus facilitators, and Martha Denier and I were a part at the beginning of that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's been a total life-changing experience for me. I'm also involved, as Ashley is, with some of the community organizing. There's an organization called Racial Justice Coalition that's doing a lot of the advocacy work and organizing people to bring about some of the changes we're attempting to bring about in the city and in the county. And yeah, just pretty much my whole life is in this space now, and feeling very grateful for all that I've learned through REI and from all of these other people that I get to work with. So, and I will pass it to Dan.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Dan Frayne. I am a family physician and who continues to practice in Asheville. I am the president of the Western North Carolina Academic Health Center. So we have residency training programs and clinical care and lots of educational outreach for the region. We're associated academically with UNC Chapel Hill in Asheville. My journey started, I actually was on a North Carolina perinatal task force, creating a strategic plan for our state. And there was an opportunity there was a requirement actually to have equity training to be on that task force. And so I took REI in Chapel Hill, I believe it's actually in 2016. I have been working in preconception health, so women's health before pregnancy, and working on infant mortality and maternal mortality for almost a decade. And I really had my eyes opened with the inequity gaps versus the aggregate numbers we were trying to solve for the United States, and really seeing the difference between black and white results that really changed my perspective dramatically. And it was about 2 months after that I took REI, and my life has never been the same since in really understanding the depth of the problem and the issues in a totally different perspective of looking at issues on how to solve them. So I did REI in Chapel Hill, and then I went to the caucuses that were ongoing in Asheville, and that is where I met Martha and Denier. And developed relationship. And what we all realized is that the only way we're going to solve this big problems, as I learned, was to build relationship. And so this group came out of a desire to not just work professionally, but actually build personal relationship amongst ourselves to become more proximate to each other. And we've been doing that now for 3 years of a kind of a leadership, relationship building, personal cohort that we could come together and talk about the unique challenges that we have both in our jobs and how we're facing this in our personal lives. And it has been transforming.
You know, I actually want to say that it's funny that Dan describes the intro to the beginning of this group that way, because it was not at all, it was not the only thing, the primary reason, right? So Dan is a leader of a large organization in the area, and there were some other leaders who were caucusing, and as our caucuses were growing, I was like, ooh, we can't have leaders put on blast saying the things that they're saying in front of everybody. So why don't we just form a smaller caucus of those leaders so that we don't have Dan saying things in front of everybody as he is trying to learn and process and grow. So, and
Yeah,
we,
and that, I mean, that was a really important aspect of this, is that, you know, if we had a few directors of big institutions, we found it very clear and quick that we had some things that we would like to get out and talk about that we didn't feel that we could in certain spaces. And we decided that if we were really going to dig in, we needed to be able to dig in together.
right.
Wow. Well, thank you all so much. I love the way that organizers come together and bring their expertise and their, you know, the things that are important to them, and then, you know, begin building that base of people. Suzanne, you and I, our history with Asheville goes way back. I think, Marta, was it Olafemi that came to Chapel Hill? And I remember, what's the young girl she came with? You're on mute. What's her name?
Laura Elsham.
Yes,
Eshelman.
yes, Laura and Olafemi. Yes, they came to Chapel Hill and did a workshop years ago. And then they kept saying, we're going to figure out how to do this in Asheville. And, you know, they just kept working it and working it and working it. And then it came to Asheville, and then it just began to, yes, it did. And it has been amazing. It has really been amazing. So Marta, can you say a little bit about race in Asheville? You know, Asheville is a unique community. And so, you know, who would think that there's, you know, sort of racial issues, social justice issues in Asheville? So can you say a little bit about, you know, the history? Because I learned it was, you know, our stereotypes and our, you know, just the assumptions that we make about what's going on where people live. I didn't know about the historic Black communities in Asheville. You know, you know about them in some of the major cities, but come to find out, I remember one of my first pamphlets that I got was about this sort of storytelling, this history of historic Black neighborhoods and how we preserve the memory and the history was in Asheville. So can you say a little bit about that?
Ooh, okay. So let me go back a little bit and say how committed we are to this, and that we've had at least like 900 or close to 1,000 people to have this shared analysis because of how progressive we are in Asheville, or we say.
Mm-hmm.
I know that my people that are on the audience, 114, I'm going to hear a lot tomorrow. But it's okay. It's okay. It's that, you know, we really consider ourselves very progressive, and we're all about race, and, you know, we care about everyone and we love everyone, and we want this to all be together and united. And in Asheville in particular, it's when we talk about equity, it washes down and waters down to the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that's why I was asking you and Monica the other day, support me with this. Because when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're talking about pink hair, you know, tattoos, piercings, same sex, transgender. And while we want to support and right and love and know that it is important to protect all of the things that I just said, if you're in any other categories and are also Black, then it's 10 times worse. Right? So when we're like, but what about disability? And what about the whatever? And I'm like, all of it is real. And if you add Black to it, then it's 10 times worse. Can we at least say yes to that? Can we not? And so historically, I moved here 31 years ago from Miami. And at the beginning, and before I knew REI, whatever, I was just living in my little white bubble world or whatever. I got to own it, right? I was married to a white man. And it was, there weren't that many Latinos here, and the Black folks that were here is kind of like, oh, okay, so specific neighborhoods, okay, and oh, a lot of housing. Oh, how does this all work? And you kind of just start inquiring and questioning. And so maybe even right before REI had asked about public housing, how that came to be about in Asheville. And every time that I would ask it, they're like, oh, well, it's just, public housing, right? Like the hood or like, the projects and stuff. And I was like, I know, but how did it start? Because Asheville's so small, and like, how does it work and what does it entail? And, I just would keep getting the runaround, and I would never get like a direct answer until I went to the African American conference at UNCA several years ago. And then one of the professors wrote about that and said, well, actually, let me tell you about public housing. The one that has the 5 entrances was built for the poor people that were white. And all the rest of them have one entrance and, the same, one entrance, one exit. And I was like, wait, what? I've been asking this for years and no one could tell me about this. And so that's when I began to ask more questions and get really involved in like, wait, how does this work? Oh, the Montforts, and oh, Wall Street, oh, all of the Black neighborhoods and redlining and taking away, just the certain places in downtown, the YMI, and different places where the Black businesses were, and how all that was just taken away. And then even to this day, except now after George Floyd, right? It's kind of like we figure out a very discreet, sly way, like Suzanne says, when power is made invisible, racism thrives.
Mhm.
And let me tell you, we are experts at that right up in here. Because, for being a really small city, we have a lot of that you would think, wait, but how? And how about the progressiveness here? And so to be 100 transparent, that's why I've always said to you and Suzanne and Monica, it's like, when you come here, let me tell you what's happening. I want to be really transparent and honest that we know a lot. We might know more than you all, or at least we're going to try and let you know that we do. And so I will let someone follow up on that, because if I go a little too deep, I might get myself in trouble.
I would say, in response to your question, Dina, that Asheville really does have the reputation of being incredibly progressive and liberal and right on all the issues, right? Right. We speak the language, and I'd like to also point out, if I'm correct in this still, Asheville has the greatest number of nonprofits per capita in the country, right? So there's a lot of people doing all the good work, right, for all the needy people in all the areas. I see you, Suzanne, and yeah, that face all the time. And so while all of that is going on, it does seem really difficult to hold that at the same time, in all the metrics along like racial disparities, we also lead the country. And I think that is just the perfect way to describe what it's like in Asheville. So the question has to be asked, and I think we ask it pretty regularly, how is it that there's so much good work here and we're so progressive, and Black people, Black and brown people, and Black people in particular are doing so badly here? And that's just what that is the tension, that is the work.
Yeah, Danielle, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because we might expect, in our state, we might expect that in Durham or in Raleigh or in Greensboro, or in Fayetteville or in Winston-Salem, and Charlotte, our metropolitan cities, our sort of suburban areas. And so, I think this speaks to the nature of the structural arrangement and design of racism, that no matter where you go, no matter how big the population is, no matter what the politics are, no matter what the sort of open-mindedness is, that this shows up over and over again. So how, this Black Pearl series is highlighting the work of organizing, because we know that, movement-minded people know that organizing is, how we begin to move systems and society in the kinds of transformation, that addresses these things in that moment and in our time. And so the only reason we do what we do is because of people like you. So what has it been like organizing in Asheville, given the open-mindedness, the progressiveness, the sort of valuing of differences and all of those other things? Because you would think it would be pretty easy, that you all have, you're just getting a lot of buy-in, and you just have people are on board right away, and you're just overwhelmed with support. What's it been like organizing there? Because, I don't think people realize behind the scenes, you all are doing the heavy lifting, doing the work, and using your spheres of influence, community, grassroots relationships, institutional and systems positions to do those things. And you're making some things happen, which we're going to get to in just a little bit, but just talk a little bit about, I remember I think Asheville was one of the first cities in North Carolina. It was the first one I see that published the State of Black Asheville.
Mhm.
And it was just like, I remember that model. And, you can't do something again about something you can't see. So at least somebody is pulling the data. I think it was from a Black professor at UNC Asheville.
I actually just went and grabbed my notebook. So Dr. Mullen is the professor who started that initiative. And so if it's helpful, I can just share some of the data from the state of Black Asheville. Most of this comes from 2015, which it's a city with a population of 88,500 people, 78% white. At the time, it was 12% Black. And the thought is probably when this census comes out, we're going to be in the single digits for the percent of Black population. Unemployment is 3 times higher for African Americans than white folks. Business ownership, there is 60 to 70% unemployment for Black teenagers. And then that's even higher in areas where there's a large congregation of Black teenagers. So those numbers are even warped. The average business owner, a white business owner, has an average annual sales of $400,000, whereas the average Black business owner has an annual sale of $40,000. So that's a huge discrepancy. There is, unfortunately, in education, we were the 5th in the nation of the largest disparity gap. It was in our Asheville City schools. In criminal justice, in Buncombe County, African Americans are 6% of the population, but 28% of the prison population. Black babies are 3 times more likely to die before their first birthday. So that's just like a taste of how extreme these inequities are. And that's where, I've worked really closely with Dr. Mullen, and he talks about how until people can see the actual data, this idea, this myth, this whatever the cultural narrative is that, oh, this is a diverse and welcoming and all this kind of plays. And because, there's those same 10 people that happen to be Black or brown that folks see everywhere and that are really nice, that white folks see everywhere and are really nice to them. See, yeah, Black and brown folks are doing good, but because, as Marta shared, these public housings are tucked out of the way very intentionally. People, you don't just stumble upon public housing in Asheville. You have to know where you're going and look for it. And then I have friends who are not from Asheville who moved to Asheville because they saw the State of Black Asheville, because they were like, okay, well, this doesn't look good, but at least we know they're paying attention to that here. So maybe there's some hope. But Dr. Mullen, I think, would confirm me saying that, he's told me stories about in the early days when his students, these are University of North Carolina, Asheville students, when they would go to collect data. So, having to go to the school district, he's had the police called on some of his students for just trying to collect data. It was way into his career, 5-6 years before anybody at institutional levels wanted to hear about the data. Whereas it's totally different now that people are quoting the data. They want him to be a part of the task force. So there is this shift going of at least willing to face the reality here.
No, I just want to say I think that's exceptional, Ashley. I don't remember that we've had anybody on any of the previous segments that we've done that just quote the data. Because I think that when we talk about the work that we're doing, it could be assumed by folks, and folks do, that, you guys are making it about race and you're putting race in our face, but really it's not about race. And I don't think there's a better way of understanding the nature of race and the interplay of race without looking at data. So I know Dina and Suzanne would probably be smiling because it's that data that really begins to inform the work. And if we can't see this, and that's kind of what we were talking about with Black Pearls, keeping race on the table is really keeping data on the table too, out front, because it's like, if you're not willing to talk about this, here's the work. And we have to be able to see that. So I want to appreciate your sharing that kind of data, but I'd love to hear other folks' reflection on the data that speaks to the town that you all live in and work in, and that you're doing this organizing, as Dina would say, in. Any of you? It's okay, Dan. We'll take it.
Right, I was gonna say, Dan, Dan would be good to speak on this.
So, I mean, I'm in the healthcare space. And what we know and what I have learned is we, until recently, until this conversation really, you get a momentum of people who are all starting to hear and understand and see things in the same way around, we are actually disaggregating our data, which is not the usual way of looking at our healthcare data. We look at all of our patients and get a quality metric and a measure, and then we either say we're doing great or we're not. And then our intervention if we're not. And so when we recognize and we start to disaggregate our data and recognize that, wait a second, we are doing well with some part of our population and not doing well with another part of our population, you start to ask different questions. And we are, our organization and our community has really focused in on infant mortality, which it is a damning statistic that we have actually one of the best healthcare systems that we believe around. We have incredible data around our quality of care on a national level. And when we see that a Black baby born in Asheville is 3 times more likely to die before their first birthday than a white baby, that is a damning statistic that nobody wants to hear, but until we hear it and we say it over and over and over again, we will never do anything different because we think we're doing a great job. And that's the kind of transformation. I'm not saying it's easy, and the change requires not me as a physician in a room trying to fix this problem. It is connecting with the community to do something different.
Dan, I'm so glad, that you're here and, with this organizing work as a physician. I was heartbroken and stunned, and I don't know why I'm stunned, because you're right. It is over and over and over. If we have, data on racial inequities in any system, it is healthcare. And, the recent ones that have come out, healthy Black babies, 3.5 times more likely to die after surgery than healthy white babies. And then the most recent one is that Black babies are 3 times more likely to die when they're under the care of a white physician. I mean, that is disturbing. And if you're a white physician or any physician and you don't know that, you can't interrupt it. I mean, this is really life interrupting, activities, awareness that's going on. This is so, so critical. So I can't say enough how important it is for people who are making decisions about people's lives, whether it's about a rigorous advanced course in school, or it's about, delivering babies and prenatal care. Just so, so important. Suzanne, did you want to say something or ask a question?
Please, yeah.
Yes, I was interested. Steve talked a little bit about some of the changes that you've tried to bring about. bring about. So I'm interested in how you are with access to these data and the shocking outcomes that we see, you know, in every institution, every system. I think people would be interested in the things that you are perhaps doing to get the data before the broader community. In other words, what are some of the things you've engaged in, those things, those changes Steve spoke about seeking to get the facts before the communities that need them?
Well, I think it's really important to point out and be really clear and transparent that we are just a representation of the people, so many people who are doing this organizing work in Asheville.
Wonderful.
Right. And so there are, you know, there are people who are helping, who help on the front end of organizing and bringing programs like REI. There are other folks. So I think what we represent on this call are really just a group of, a small group of people who get together to talk about how each of us in our institutions can operate, and we support each other that way. So I am in private schools or independent schools, as we now call them. Martha works in the public school system. Dan is in medicine, obviously, and Ashley and Steve are all over the place with tentacles in so many different organizations. And we just come together to support each other in those various roles. But the Racial Equity Collective, for instance, is a larger group of people who organize, and the Keep It Moving Coalition is also a larger group of people. And the Racial Justice Coalition is a completely separate organization. And, right, and it's important to say that we continuously work together and see how we can support each other in all the various ways. Martha has this great little saying about passing notes. So for instance, what I can't say, I might pass a note to Ashley and say, Ashley, this is, can you please say this? Just a note, just Ashley, you have to be the one that says this thing, right? And I think that's one of the ways in which we work together to organize. And it's really important, right? We tend to hop into these silos, and Asheville has been criticized for this, and it's not true only for Asheville, right?
No,
that we tend to, right, we tend to work in silos, and we just happen to be a group of people who are committed to breaking those silos and offering space where we can all come together and support each other in this work. And so it looks a lot of different ways in how we get this information out, right?
Yeah. As it should, Danielle.
I want to jump in right away because Danielle made it really beautiful, and I'm going to jump in and say that we've had, that's the beautiful side of how we work in this team that you see here together. And we've also had some moments where we're kind of like, what did you say? What are you doing? Right. And so I want to be as transparent because I don't want the folks that are on this call to just be thinking like, oh my gosh, look at how well they get along and they must just really like each other. And especially when Dan Frayne says it's about relationships, right? And then people's like, oh, well, I'm in relationship with so many of you. And it's like, no. We're talking about relationships of revolutionary love where I can go in and be like, you guys, what are you doing? Come here. We can't say that. Like, what were you thinking? Can we really go in a little deeper? Or pushing in and pushing back and calling in and calling out and going so hard and being like, I don't agree with you. And that is some and no, ma'am. And no, I mean, and just going in. And I hope that we modeled even the way that we open. I mean, one of you called on me first, but that we modeled, right? Here's Danielle's next, and Danielle called on Ashley next, right? Then Ashley called on Steve next, and then we leave the president of MAHEC, the leader, the white man, for last, right? That, you know, we think about things like that, but no one's gonna be like, oh, could you believe that they left the president of MAHEC to be last? Why would they do that? We want to be constantly modeling what this really looks like when you really are wanting to be in this work together, and that it's not always beautiful. And some days it's really hard and some days it's challenging. And you think like, are we ever going to speak to each other ever again? Like, do you think I went a little too hard? Are we coming back from this one? And I just want to keep it that 100, because we have gone to all of those places and it has not been beautiful and delicious. Like everyone on this panel says, well, those would be Marta's words, because I try to keep it that way, because I have to have some language around how do we really keep this moving in a way that we can all understand that Ashley, your liberation is tied to mine, and Danielle and Suzanne and Monica and Dina and Steve and Dan and me, and that if we don't get it, we're still gonna be stuck in the same place. And that it looks like even if you are the president of MAHEC or you are the boss and the CEO, whatever, that it doesn't really matter. When we're doing this work, you are just your name, and I'm gonna tell you that's some beep, and we're not doing that. And that you cannot ever tell me, I don't care what your title is, you cannot ever tell me about being Latina if you're not Latina. No matter what, you cannot ever tell me about how it is to live in brown skin when you don't, and you could have read 933 books and I still say, I don't think so, right? So thank you, Danielle, and I appreciate the reframing of the beauty, but I have to just kind of break it down and say that some days, even when we're at the People of Color Conference and we're like, Danielle, we need to talk a little bit more about this, or Ashley, come here. And we have just gone so in with tears, with strong, forceful, and then the beauty. And that's why I think all of us can be on here today and model, I hope, of what this can look like and should continue to look like.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. That is so important, because Suzanne shared an article with me, and it's an article that resonates with me because it is something that is heartbreaking and just really disturbing to me. It was an article called Anti-Racist Arguments Are Tearing Us Apart. And it's about how in the anti-racist community, we are turning on each other. And we can't make mistakes. We're actually modeling white supremacy culture when we do that.
Right.
And that is a powerful framework to think about that. It's like, yeah, we're gonna make mistakes, get things wrong. People are gonna do things wrong, but you erode this base and what do you have? And, Suzanne always says, you hurt who you can reach. And so, when we're angry and frustrated, we reach out and hurt and do damage to our own organizing efforts. And because we feel we're not proximate to the kind of power that we believe changes things. And what we do is that we're not going to be able to get to that if we start cannibalizing and doing some of these things. So I appreciate Marta and all of you talking about, it's not easy. We struggle with each other, but we also keep our eyes, on the issue. And we know we have to stay intact. And I appreciate having an alternate model to the one that we have in place now, because it is exhausting. It is hurtful. It's hurtful because after a while, people are like, well, I'm not doing the movement any good because, all I'm doing is fighting and you see things happening every day and we're not even discussing those because we just had to call out that you said something. And now I'm going to make your resignation and, vilify all of that stuff my priority. And it's just like, well, you know what? The people who won't give you the time of day, you don't touch them.
Right.
So, well, I'm telling you, I just appreciate that so much, that you all are modeling how, we struggle together, that we are committed to the movement, not to the mistakes that people make. So Dan, Steve, you want to say, yeah, we'll have Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is what the system wants us to do. It wants to divide us, wants us to fight. And so part of how we are together, I believe, is how we change things. That's a big piece of how we change things, is to continue to show up, stay connected, or develop our connection with ourselves, with each other, and the whole planet. Yeah, I forgot, I just wanted to share, some of you probably know Dove Kent from Durham. And I was in a session where she made this point where everybody just stopped in their tracks, which was, you can't organize people who you don't love. And it was just that point that if people don't feel loved, they're not going to keep showing up for the work.
So one of the things, I mean, this is a really important part of the challenge, is that I think we have been successful in a small group. We did the phase 2 training in Asheville. We were ready for it. We did the phase 2, and we weren't able to go beyond it because of this issue. Because of this issue is that we could not commit enough to the various disparate groups who are trying to work this, to commit to each other, to give the grace, to give the partnership, to recognize that we're not perfect, that we're trying to do this. But there was 50 people in the room, and we looked around and said, people in Asheville are this dedicated. And we said, maybe 50 more. So 100 out of 88,000. And if yes, and that remains one of the spots where we're kind of still stuck, even though we're moving forward, even though we're having some good positive things happening, such as the Department of Health declaring racism as a public health crisis, such as the city council, voting on reparations. We're doing good work, and yet we're still not doing it coordinated together as a community.
And sometimes we are in our own way. So I think for me, a real practical thing was, there's this thing in Asheville that apparently happens, right? Black transplants to Asheville apparently do just fine. And those who are native to Asheville seem to struggle more. This is the narrative, right? So, and I'm a transplant. And I had to look around at that and say, oh, so if I'm coming in as, city chick, right, from all these other places with a long career behind me, what do I really know about being Black in Asheville? So I said this to Martha all the time. Sometimes my best job, even as a Black woman, right, is to just shut up and let the Black people who are native to Asheville have their say, because they actually know what works for them. And just because I have the language doesn't mean that I have the answer. And it's really important that, even in our social justice spaces, that we recognize that and be willing to step aside for that. And so that's what I try to do.
It's difficult. And sometimes one of the things we say in organizational development work, was it Steve, you said you did OD work, a lot of OD work. But one of the things we used to say in assessment processes was speak to the value of the fresh eye. Speak to the value of the eye that is not socialized in certain ways of being and knowing, but the fresh eye, the person who comes to it in a fresh way. And so, Danae, I know you bring that, and I know it's valued in Asheville. And I certainly, and we certainly value it as well.
I wanted to ask, go ahead, Ashley.
Well, I would love to say something to Jorge's asking some great questions about, and Danae Dan just spoke to, we have all of these resolutions that are being passed. And my journey started, I was a school counselor, and I was at a school that was all about bringing in diversity. So they'd go and get all of these little children in the kindergarten classroom, but the school was such a white culture that the families and the children would struggle tremendously. And so that was 15 years ago for me, of okay, what do we do to actually make this a place where families can thrive? And my experience was how deep the dependence on trainers is, how strong that all of our administration was just like, well, we're going to bring a trainer in. And so a trainer would come in and they would teach us something. And then everyone's like, okay, well, now we know this. And I feel like that to me is like so pervasive in white leadership around issues of equity, is that folks don't know what to do. And so they ask what to do. You know, here right now, they go to REI and they're like, okay, so now I've had these 2 days, but there's not a understanding of what does it look like to start to deconstruct the culture? What does it look like to go in and like, great, you have this resolution of racism, you know, with our brains, we know with our brains, the data's been out there, we know that there's an issue. But folks are, from my perception, I don't have anybody that pays me so I can say the things, that folks don't have they aren't taking the rigor to do the deeper work to figure out how to deconstruct all of these ways that these oppressive patterns are showing up. And so what I feel like we've been trying to do as organizers is to connect individually with individuals, you know, like organize more people to mobilize for accountability, but also who are people in positions of power. And how, like, as a white woman, I mean, I just said to someone at a large institution yesterday that was horrifying. The language that they sent in a contract was horrifying. You know, we had to address that. And then after addressing it, I also said, and as a white woman, if you need some support and how you're going to go talk to your boss about the fact that y'all can't use language like this and claim that you're all about equity, that's what I do in my volunteer time. So I'll support you with that if you need that in any way. So I think that ties into the relationship that Dan and Everett were talking about.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in and ask the question because I think Tina might have alluded to it, and if not, you know, so we have George Floyd, and that in that 8 minutes and 46 seconds, everything that follows is that everybody's now rushing to say something in support of an anti-racist agenda, and I see Jorge even alluding to the fact that, you know, there isn't a place without a platform these days. There isn't a place without a statement. There's not a place with, but I think what we are trying to figure out, and which is real important for us, is that we have words that often precede action. As a matter of fact, we have a lot of words and sometimes absolutely no action. So I'm interested to know, so as a collective group in the way that you're organizing, and I know that you've been together for a very long time, what are some of those issues that you've taken on that have been made real through the collective action that, you know, here in Greensboro, we spent a lot of time as an organizing entity really beginning to understand, to have a common language, to recognize our shared interests and all of the other things that we say. But we are now, I would say, just in the last few years of being able to count our successes, because now we can organize as a cross-racial team. I'd like to understand some of the ways in which that's felt in your racial equity collective that is Asheville. And that's an anybody question, but it is somebody's question.
I work in a white institution, right? Like, I don't even know how to hide. Like, there's no point in hiding that. And after George Floyd, you're right, everyone wanted to make a statement. And as the only Black person right, at the school, in the school that's really trying to do the work, I said, let's not make a public statement. Let's not weigh in. Let's not perform, right? But let's continue to do the work that we've been doing, right? And that we don't talk a lot about in Asheville, frankly. But what are some other ways, even as we're all struggling with coronavirus and what it means to our institutions, what are some other ways we can step in and be supportive of other organizations and other groups that are trying to do some work? Because of this collective, right, Marta and I had been having a conversation about what it means to, what could pods look like, for instance. We could then we could reach out to Dan to say, well, what is it? What is the work and what happens if we, for like best practices when it comes to health? I think that, and I hope this answers your question, that that's for me anyway, in our organization, that's what that has meant, right? Less performance, less public, more just utilizing our relationships in the community to not show, but to show up, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't need, we don't need the fanfare, but what little we can do, we can do. How can we share what we are doing and what's working for us with communities of color in the area and Black folks who also want the same things and just don't have the same resources.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to put it any more plainly than that.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, I know you're trying to answer a question from somebody. There's just great conversation happening both in the chat and the Q&A, and there's a Q&A question we'll get to too. But Steve, you're on mute. I wanted to give you an opportunity to answer, I think, Courtney's question. You can restate the question.
Yeah, and before I answer it, I just want to kind of add to what Danae is saying. And for me, because all through this work and the caucusing and all of this stuff, we were regularly having a conversation. Are we doing anything? Is this having any effect? And it really was for me when the George killing happened and George Floyd killing happened, and the way all those relationships that had been formed across the community, not just within our group, but with people who had been to REI and been to the caucuses and involved in other efforts, where there was enough trust and relationship where organizing could happen really quickly without having to work through a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the big efforts that came out of this was the RJC, Racial Justice Coalition, where all of a sudden all of these people came into to show up to do work, and we were able to organize them and start saying, look, this is what we need you to do, and to continue the momentum. And we still have to figure out what do we do to support these people so they keep doing it and they don't, because it's mostly white people. What's going to happen is the interest wanes, the momentum wanes. So we're working to see how we can keep that momentum going.
Can I
And
just
that kind of leads to the answer to the question of
Steve, can I just, before you leave to the next one?
Cortland asked, which was, I have to go back and find.
I don't think you can
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, just to clarify that, so the Racial Justice
Yes,
Coalition is a
No, I hear you.
is a Black-led organization, and the organizing was, there was a Black Asheville collective that came together that started with like 60 Black leaders or Black folks, leaders and regular folks that are leading in their own just general lives. And they came together and created a set of demands. And then the Racial Justice Coalition came together and said, okay, we're gonna activate some of the mobilizing of folks for advocacy. So how do we, when we've got these demands coming from Black leadership, we need more energy behind to push them. And so when Steve said we were mostly white, that's I kind of think of us as the ants. That's the like ants coming behind saying, okay, you need letters to city council at this is what we need to be talking about. Great. All right. You need folks who can gather information about who was harmed during protests so we can better understand what happened. Okay. So that's the white and Black kind of interrelationship that was able to, I think, exist stronger because we've been forming these relationships through caucuses and through going through these shared experiences together.
And it's worth saying again and reiterating that started with Black people saying what we want instead of white folks saying, oh, what I think you should do, or what I think you should have, or what I think you need, right? We can't stress that enough, right? It's I think one thing we are starting to practice well is things are Black-led. Government may not be at this point, but we can get there. But like the grassroots efforts, there's a lot of pushback against, white folks coming in and saying, oh, this is how we can help. Right? Instead of saying, oh, Black people make a decision about what we want. And, oh, here's how you can support if that is what you want to do. But you just have to be really clear about that dynamic, I think, for any organizing to be real and lasting.
Yeah, and I think, that's so important, Danielle, to say that, our caucus, the way that we work together, at the Racial Equity Institute, at the Guilford Anti-Racist Alliance, and all of the ways that we organize here in our community, is that, modeling, taking leadership from people of color. It also means that in that relationship, that the collaboration sometimes leads to white people being asked to step out front and take on an issue. When you're in accountable relationships, you don't distort or misunderstand that.
Right.
Because the people that are showing up out of an accountable relationship with people of color. And so, again, I just think we have to be committed to the work that we're doing. Or be curious about it. Ask questions first before you mount these campaigns, because it's hard being in this work. It is hard. It is painful. It is a sacrifice. It's our duty and our obligation. And, let's try to figure stuff out. If you're not trying to solve this problem or figure something out or resolve a conflict or, something that doesn't feel right about this, if you're not trying to work and solve that inside, what you do is you make it impossible for people to stay together and be in the work. And, you all, and I think we all, and the other organizing committees that we have featured and highlighted in this Black Pearl series are people who are able to withstand, that tactic.
One of the things that I really have appreciated in this work is that, early on, me in my position kind of felt like I wanted to be a part of everything and really get in. And the best advice I got was from a colleague of mine, Dr. Art James, who some of you may know, who is really a leader in this work. And he really was candid with me. He says, listen, you are a leader of the largest healthcare education institution in Western North Carolina. Fix your own house first and focus there. And so it is a journey of focusing on my organization and making sure that the 750 employees and the 122 residents and students, that we start to change our ability to actually recruit, retain physicians of color. So physicians of color in Asheville represent 1% of all physicians. And here we are, the training institution for those physicians. And we have to change what we do in order to get a different result, which means really understand. And from a results, we're still in the infancy, but we're seeing results. We now have an African-American male physician OBGYN who is in charge of our OBGYN residency program. We have about 6 African-American residents, and about 2 or 3 years ago, we had 0. And so we are making progress. It takes time, but I think that idea from an organizational and a community level, some people may look and say, you're not doing enough in the community. And that idea of okay, I will get there, but I got to fix what I can fix internally, or we're never going to get a different result in the community.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. Thank you, Dan. It is so important, and people don't see, by the time something happens, and I know we got to get to the reparations, vote in Asheville. It's a big thing out here. People don't realize all the stuff that led up to that. That wasn't just some city council people, deciding, oh yeah, it's time. That was a legacy of organizing. That is the capacity that you all have been building. That is the shared analysis and framework that you work from, because you've gotten city council people, and you've gotten school board members, and you've gotten superintendents, and you've gotten hospital personnel in, you've gotten the community leadership in. And so this leads to one of the questions in the Q&A that's asking, Wendy Green's asking, are the native Black folks in Asheville part of your leadership? So Marta, Danielle, that's probably most appropriate for one of you to answer that question. And then Ashley, anybody else that has any follow-up, feel free to.
Assuming, Wendy, you mean leadership of this group, or because if that's the question, I would say this group, we are not the leaders of the group. We're not the leaders of our of this organizing team, right? And so I would call it leaderless. We happen to be folks who have a relationship with each other and work a lot together, but there are lots of people in who are doing this work on the ground, and I can think of 2 people who are really regularly involved, who are natives, who are always there, always in it, always doing something.
Marta, is there anything you want to add to that? I know, because I've met so many people there, native people are native. I mean, that's a lot about how we got there with Green Opportunities and some other organizations. So I've met a lot of people through some of the initiatives and efforts there that have been there all their lives. And, everybody's organizing where they can, organize where you can. We're going to meet up, we can't address everything and check all the boxes because we're starting to build this and getting our bearings. And so, so we're glad that everybody's doing the work where they're doing the work. Marta?
Yes, thank you, Tina. So to Danielle's point, I would say for me, right, being here 31 years, and sometimes people say to me, well, you're almost like a native. And I was like, yeah, kind of, but not really, right? And I know some of the folks that are on the call right now, and so I would be remiss if I didn't say all that I'm learning, right, from Miss Joanne, right, that is like here telling me like, girl, let me tell you how we're going to do this. What? Come here.
Yes.
And then you just have a quiet conversation with her. I mean, I'm going to just bust her wide open right now. She is texting me right now, right? Like, let's do it. Praying for you, right? Like lifting me up, because that's what we do. And, she's like, don't worry about the food. I got this taken care of. I got this or whatever. I know the hookups. I know who's going to give us this. I know. Right. So it's kind of like sometimes we just go in circles to make something happen when all of the answers are like right next door. Right. So it's like, who is it that you're inviting and including and making, a part of a group or a team? That's why Danielle says we're not the leaders, right? Because there is so much autonomy here because we each have a unique gift to bring. And it's kind of like, who has the connection and who has the sphere of influence here, right? Like when you get the hotel and the other one. So we have so many pieces that we just know who's going to bring about this thing and make it happen. And so to me, it's been really beautiful, right? To really understand and learn that I'm going to go for it and I might be in trouble in 5 minutes. Black elders, right? Being like, come here, let me talk to you. Come over here. What are you doing? Right. And then being like, yes, ma'am. And what is it that you want me to do? And then you'd be like, this is how we do it. And then right there, we build that extra connection of no matter what time it is, I can call and be like, Miss Chamber, what's going to happen? She's like, it's already been taken care of. Right. Yeah. That type of thing. So sometimes we have a name and the title and the this or whatever. And leadership is, let me tell you about living here my whole entire life, and something that you will never, ever, ever get in a book. You will never, ever, ever live long enough to know what it is that I have lived through, what I do, where I've been, where I'm at, and what am I going to continue doing till I take my last breath. So pay attention, Missy, ma'am. And I'm like, yes, right? So, and then of course we've had superintendents and we've had, the ones with the titles. And to me, the way that we move here and in our facilitator roles and in organizing or whatever is really understanding that there is so much power, right? In Black leadership and Black natives, that if we really just get out of the way.
Just get out of the way.
Get out of the way and focus and pay attention. And that is why it's so beautiful that we can model again, right? Having our 3 Ashley and Steve and Dan on here and Danielle and I would sometimes say like, well, you know, we want it to be like this, or we want it to go like this. And it's not that we have all the answers, right? It's that we have a very different experience. And then sometimes I'm kind of like, well, I'm going to step this one out, and this needs to be Danielle's call all the way, and really recognizing, right? Where is your lane? Where is your place? And when you don't have that clear, and when you don't understand that, you can create a hot mess. And I think that this team right here has gotten very clear on that. And we're not there. Like I say, even every time we have REI, we are not equified by any stretch of the imaginations, but we are on that journey, and we grow those muscles every single day together.
Yeah,
Speaking of elders, it would be unfair, right, for us to act as though the first time REI came, right, 5 years ago, that, you know, Asheville was just a community of folks who were ready to hear it, right? Before REI, there had been 20 years of building bridges, coming together twice a year to have a conversation, right? So, you know, we can stop with like Asheville's just liberal and progressive and ready to do the work. It's been more than 20 years of constant ongoing efforts by people in the area. As you said, Dina, a legacy of folks pushing for this, for us to finally get to, oh, city council's gonna pass reparations. And it can't end there, right? So like now, as I think Jorge has been pointing out in the chat, what do we mean? What happens past the proclamation, right? How are we gonna make that work, right? We have got to work on like building that muscle for stamina and persistence. Otherwise, it's just going to be Asheville said the nice thing, the Department of Health said the nice thing, and in 10 years, right, Black babies will still be dying.
Yeah, that accountability is important. If you don't have a base in place, then when systems do make a decision, one, are you there to defend the decision if it's the one you've been pushing for? Two, if they make a decision, you got to be there for the accountability piece.
Right.
But somebody has to be organized and sustained to be able to handle that. And Marta, I appreciate you talking about and you know, Native Asheville leaders, you know, because if you haven't sat down with Miss Joanne and her scrapbook, you know, looking at the pic, yes, if you haven't sat at the table with Miss Joanne and her scrapbook, you know, then you know, you might need to meet some folks, because it is really important, and you have the blessing and you have the support of people who have seen this throughout their lives. So Monica, I know there's some things in the Q&A.
Well, and I think there are two questions that are still on the table. One that I didn't ask much earlier, but I'm just going to put it back out there too, is Dina, when you talk about the doctors, when you talk about that data, you know, Dina and I presented to a group today, and you know something? Sometimes in groups there's a deafening silence, which can mean a multiplicity of things, but it's almost a killer. Because the thing that I know that I'm often riveted by is the depth of curiosity. And what's sometimes frightening, more frightening than anything, is when people cease to be curious. That wherever you think you are, whatever you think you know, that when information is presented, that you have no curiosity about it, particularly when that curiosity points to data that says folks are dying, dramatically so, 3, 5, 7 times whatever their counterparts are. So that's one of the things that I kind of want to position, is the kind of curiosity that when Ashley, you started, and you and Marta with this data, then what are our curiosities about it? Because do you just hear data to hear it? Because we all hear that it's devastating and it's impacting very negatively. But what curiosities do we have about it, you know? And then, so that was one. And then the other part, of course, is still, you know, the organizing body that is this racial equity work, what has been the position or your collective response when there's when a reparations bill, or however, a resolution or a proclamation or whatever gets put on the table? Because I'm wondering, is that happening absent of the organizing that you all are doing? Somebody just does it and it's out there, or is that a result of the organizing that you're doing? Because that's a question that when I first heard it, that's really not answered. Where was this collective, you know, and what's this engagement with that? So I asked two questions, I'm sorry.
Maybe I could jump in and try and weave a little bit, which is, I just want to say, we're not an organization.
Right.
So
Mhm.
there's the Racial Equity Collective, which is a group of folks that includes folks who aren't here, who helped to bring REI here. We're some of the organizers for the caucuses. One of the things about Asheville, and particularly with it having such a small population of people of color, is that there are so many incredible Black and Brown leaders who are organizing, and they're completely max doing their organizing in youth development and in all of the areas. And what I've been jealous watching some of these other cities at some of the teams that you've brought together that are like actual official institutions that can have a, not institutions, but groups that can have a voice together. Because we don't have anything like that. But one thing I will say, like, as a, how is the curiosity? So with the reparations initiative, what the conversation, so Rob Thomas is the community liaison for the Racial Justice Coalition. And one of the things he talks, and he's in communication with all kinds of other Black leaders around town. And he speaks a lot that the real important focus for him is around how do we address generational wealth? And so, and I'm looking at some notes that are like notes that I've pulled from listening to him answer these questions a lot of time. And one of the things he says is like, the purpose of this resolution is to kick the door open to get the community actually at the table, which is another area. We have a long history of all kinds of great listening sessions and community engagement, and like all kinds of information is gathered from the community and then nothing's done with it. And so the curiosity that that I'm hearing being talked about is how do we actually, not just as reparations get money into a certain number of a check into somebody's hands, but what sort of things can happen that'll actually shift so that there's generational wealth? How do we have land ownership? How do we have home ownership? How do we have money being poured into economics so people can be starting their own businesses and have the infrastructure to support the businesses being able to get to the point of thriving so that there's money to pass down from generations? And so the purpose from, from the Racial Justice Coalition's perspective of the resolution was, let's not prescribe it, because what Rob would say over and over, and Tasia also, who's part of Racial Justice Coalition, a young youth Black leadership. So that's also important, is the collaboration between elders and youngers that's happening. But they say how, oh, I lost where I was trying to go there. Yep, I lost it, so I'll stop.
Kicking in the door and making sure the community is at the table and not just having listening sessions.
Oh, right, thanks. So what they were really clear is they didn't want the city with its institutional power as council members and people with high paying jobs that might not be from this town to be the ones deciding what goes in a reparations resolution. So while there's a lot of pushback of folks saying that, the resolution doesn't actually do anything, which is true, it doesn't do anything, but what it does is it contextualizes in a very profound way all of the areas where something needs to be done. And so for me as an organizer, I'm like, okay, there's my prescription. Like, this is what we need to do about urban renewal. This, like, each line item requires some form of reparations. And so their approach is, rather than the people with institutional power deciding what that is, let's make them commit to something so that we can hold them accountable. And then let's get Black community members at the table to actually decide what that could look like.
Excellent. Any other responses to that? So are there more questions then that we need to direct, Tina, from our chat or the Q&A that has not been asked?
One was a question for Dan. Dan, if you can, it's for some comments you made earlier. So the question for Dan, it says, that sounds great. Reflecting on some challenges in my own town, do you have a retention strategy? Right. So you were just talking about the recruiting, and they're talking about, do you have a retention strategy as well as a recruitment strategy for people of color, particularly African-American health providers at the physician level? And I would assume others.
So I'll say we're working on it. What we have come to understand and starting to change the narrative. The narrative 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was we can't retain any or recruit or retain any Black physicians in Asheville because they don't want to come.
Right.
And there was a whole bunch of reasons why we all, as white people, could say why they don't want to come. And we are changing the narrative as saying that we are the reason why they don't want to come.
And stay.
And so what are we going to do to make ourselves attractive, to make them want to come? And then when they come, what are we going to do to help them stay? And so we that is the work that we're in the middle of. And like I said, we are starting to get some traction. We are having some progress. What we organizationally are the words we're using now is that we don't just want to recruit. We want to have somebody come. We don't want them to just come and survive. We want them to come and thrive. And that takes an entirely new environment of learning and support and connection. And we can't do it alone. We've talked, and that's part of the work that this group has done with connecting with folks at the city, with creating opportunities for connection, brainstorming about the social aspects of life in Asheville and how to engage that differently. But that's the work, and that gets the challenge is real. But again, the barrier reflects back on us, not on the person, the people of trying to figure out why they won't come.
Excellent.
Dan, that really suits one of the things we say at REI and in our organizing is that you can be racially equitable before you're diverse. And what I mean by that is that you can examine your institution, your culture, all of the ways in which whiteness is central to everything it is that you do. So we say that you can be racially equitable in your culture before you're diverse, but being diverse doesn't make you racially equitable. And sometimes we think it does. And so we just, Suzanne often says we invite people to an environment we haven't even examined, and then we wonder why they won't come or why they won't stay. And I can't tell you, I mean, I've talked to people in, these high profile law firms. I hear the same thing. It's like, why don't you have any Black associates that can work their way up to partner? Well, they don't want to come to Greensboro, or they don't want to come to North Carolina. They want to go to a sexy place like DC or Chicago or Miami. And I'm like, I know plenty of Black kids in law school at North Carolina Central and other places that would love to practice in a firm that has the connections and the opportunities that your firm might offer. So I so appreciate you saying that again, that you hear it as well in healthcare. Oh, hear it about construction. Oh, we can't find plumbers. We can't find Black and Latino. It's like, you got to be kidding.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Dan, may I put you on blast about the early part of our relationship and our frustration? So there's this thing that white folks do, right?
Everybody buckle up, buckle up.
That drives me a little bit nuts, right? When they get the data, Monica, and like the question that I always hear is, what do we do? How can we fix it? First of all, you can sit down and reflect. But beyond that, like Dan used to always ask me, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I would say, you made it. You somehow managed to become a doctor and become head of this major organization. You know what to do. The question is, will you do it and lifting up Black people coming behind you, right? So, and that's part of what he's saying, right? Like, even as white folks are busy going, what to do, what to do, what to do, you know the formula because you did it for yourself, right? And so, like, can we look real seriously at where the problem is lying and why all of a sudden you don't know how to get into college? So thank you, Dan, for like sitting in that.
Well, thank you, Danae, and I hope you haven't missed your plane, because by the way, folks, that traveling tonight. But because we're only 5 minutes from really wrapping this up, what I'd like to do is to give each of you an opportunity just to close with whatever your thoughtful reflections are about the experience of this organizing work that you're doing as a racial equity collective. So Steve, I'll start with you since you're at the corner of my frame, but and we'll work our way down.
Well, and rather than directly answering your question, I'm going to attempt to answer the question that was asked about how do we get white people to see that there's this systemic racism. And I think it comes back to the principle from the ground rule from REI of get proximate to the problem. And that our role, what we've seen as our role with this group is our job is to get the people with especially in the white caucuses, the white people having a shared analysis and giving them a space to process what they need to process so they could show up and be able to go to the people that they're proximate with, whether it's family, friends, or where they work, so that they can be the ones who communicate that, because it really comes from being a relationship with people that's going to have impact in changing the ways other white people see it. So my role in this work has been to have more people be able to have those conversations than just me, if that makes sense.
Excellent. Thank you. Steve, Dan, how about you?
So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
It wasn't a question. Really what I was asking is that as we are wrapping up, whatever are your last thoughts or reflections about this collective and the work you all are doing?
Well, so just I would say that one of the aha moments that Denier was referring to is that recognizing what I actually have to offer in the work is influence and connection. Not trying to fix the problem, not necessarily showing up at a rally. My job, what got to me to where I am is who you know and who you can talk to and how to talk to them. And when I start to use that lens, then I can see how we can really flip this ship around, is influence and connection in the space, because I know the white space really well. And connecting into it, and then using that to get a different result, is the way I kind of reflect on our work together.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Danae?
One of the things I hope that we will all do in all of our work is, can we stop acting like we were born woke? and criticizing everybody who doesn't have the same analysis or the same perspective or the same great idea that we have. Just, can we relax a little bit and be like more with each other instead of like outwoking each other? That's
okay. I love it. I love it. Ashley?
Well, when Danielle was talking earlier, I showed my shirt that was just given to me that says that white people's work is smashing white supremacy. And I feel like, in addition, my curiosity is how do we be loving? How do we have revolutionary love? But also for my white folks, how do we build our rigor so that we can actually, and I come more from the activist standpoint of like, how do we get in and like really hold accountability for the things that are being said with rigor? And I mean, I'm so grateful for Dina, you hurt who you can reach. My experience as a white person is the more rigor I show and the more I show up, the more I'm who can be reached. And so how do we also have enough relationships that when that hurt happens, we have people we can turn to too. So we're not out there fighting alone, but that we're in relationship doing this together, even if there's not somebody by the side at the moment.
Yeah, that was Suzanne. I was quoting Suzanne when I said you heard who you can reach.
Thank you for that clarity, Dina. Marta?
I only have like a minute, but I want to say so much. So thank you, Monica, Suzanne, and Dina for, I mean, I can't even tell you, right? Like having y'all on speed dial has like saved my life on like every move that I want to make when I'm not sure. And I feel so fortunate and blessed with that. And we didn't mention a whole lot about COVID, even though we're in the middle of it. So that just goes to show you how, right, we centered and focused we are on this work. And I just wanted to say that a beautiful thing that I've learned through COVID from Black families is that I've been on so many Zoom calls, and many people that are not Black, that are professionals, have been like, I'm so worried about the Black kids that, we're already part of the achievement gap and now they're falling behind, and what's going to happen? And so I was like, well, we weren't as concerned when they were in the building. Right. And then people have not liked that. And I'm sure I'm going to get probably a couple of phone calls after this as well. And so then when I've checked in with lots of Black mamas, it has been like a beautiful thing saying, Miss Marta, we are chilling, we are resting. My child does not feel like they're going to get sent to the office. They're not experiencing racism. I mean, we're chilling, right? And so then now we just came up with this thing where we're going to be pushing little pods in the communities and stuff, and just trying to do things in a beautiful way to show what it would look like in a new way to really reach out to Black students and say how amazing and incredible each Black student is, and do school in a different way, and what data and what beautiful things we're going to gather. And then also that a way of changing the narrative with our work with ourselves is to really look inward, right? For us as Black and brown people, what is the narrative and the lies that we have bought into, and what are we going to do about it? And then for the white folks, decolonize you first before you can go into any action steps. And that has been a really big piece.
You
Thank
do
you
know
all.
you spent that minute twice. You do know that, right? I can say that to her, y'all. So anyway, we're inviting you back. We are going to be spending time with the collective from Cleveland, Ohio, otherwise known as the Third Space Action Lab. And we sure hope you're going to be with us. Thanks to Suzanne, thanks to Dina, and thanks to all of you for returning. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.